Recording in progress.
And Charlie is here, I just don't know
Okay.
where he disappeared to.
Okay. All right, we ready to get started? All right, let's go ahead and kick this off. I'd like to start actually with Tom, with your document, if that's all right, that you sent that had all the, sorry. I'd like to get started. I'd like to start, if that's all right with everybody, with the document that Tom West had sent with all the revisions, unless there was something else you wanted to start with before that.
No, we can start there, that's fine.
Okay, all right.
That's the one that I sent out, and we're looking for any feedback you might have on it.
And there were some comments. I noticed that people were able to put comments on the side of this document.
Right, you know, this is the, I took the original document that, I don't know, I know Nancy, you had
Yes.
put comments in
Yeah.
it, so I just worked from that.
Very clever.
My comments were on the original document,
Oh, okay.
not the revised document. But I've now added comments on the revised document, but it was, but I have those just prepared
All right,
to
good. Thank
provide
you.
now, so.
All right.
So do you want me to just give an overview of it?
If you would,
Get
please.
us started?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So what I did here is I tried to take the sections that really talk about plan review process from the subdivision code, primarily 170-19 and 170-20. That's what this is. So that's where someone's coming in with a major subdivision plan and submitting it to the city, all the way up to when city council acts on it. So that's the core of the review process. This doesn't contain everything in the subdivision ordinance, like the design standards and all that we're also working on. But I thought it would be good for us, we've had a lot of discussion about this part of it, is to try and write the code and go through it with, send it to you so you had it, and we could go through it. Janelle and I also talked about a few things in here about just the technical processing things, and we can go over that too. But I wanted to send this out so that we, as the subcommittee, could look at it and see how close we are to what your thoughts are on the process, and then make adjustments to this as needed. And then we can go back and look at the design standards, which we're still working on, and some of the other parts. I do have also, this shows where we are with a lot of things, so we'll go through that too. But this is really on the left side and the right side. I was trying to think, how can I give you something that you can compare where we are with what we're proposing. So the left panel is the code the way it is, and sort of aligned with the sections in the right panel, which represents the code with the adjustments that we've talked about. We wrote some proposals in here, and we wanted to give it to you to get your feedback on it. The middle column is just what I would just say they're highlighting some of the big changes in the right-hand side. We're saying what's been removed or shifted around. And I'll just, if you'd like, I'll just jump down through things unless you want to, maybe I'll introduce it section by section, and then if we want to have discussions on details in each section, we talk about it. Would that be most efficient?
I believe so. Thank you.
Great. So the first part, Charlie, here's a copy. Oh, thank you. The first part is again, 170-19. It's not the first part of the ordinance, but the first part, it was called preliminary consent. Through our discussions, we're suggesting calling it preliminary plan review. And the first big thing in it.
Sorry, can I just add, as I was reading through it, because we're looking at changing some of the terminology here, throughout it's preliminary plan review, but when we review it, if it's approved and moves to the next stage, I think the language still says like consent or approval. And I think we need to think of what language we're using to describe what it is after it's gone through just this first stage. Just because I'm concerned that the reason we changed it to preliminary plan review was that the public often gets confused and thinks it's a fully approved and, is going ahead plan for construction.
So my thought was the first round with the recommendation from the planning commission and then it going to mayor and council, it's still a preliminary plan. So even when it gets to mayor and council, it's still called the preliminary plan. If we miss something, we can definitely clean that up. We're doing a lot of tweaking, so if we missed it, please let us know. But to me, it's just preliminary plan, and then planning commission will make a recommendation to council about the preliminary plan. Mayor and council will then review the preliminary plan and make a final decision whether or not then it can then move to if they approve the preliminary plan, but it doesn't mean it's approved because they approved the preliminary plan and it still has to go through get all its agency approvals and all of that, and then it goes back to mayor and council for final approval.
So it should just say preliminary plan approval.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And commission will just be making a recommendation, and then council will make the
We
decision.
would have a recommendation for approval.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're all comfortable with that.
conditions or whatever, and then the council would approve the preliminary plan, if they approve it.
Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, that was the intent. If we missed it, it's at the planning commission, it's recommendation for approval, and when council gets it, they're approving preliminary plan to go to the next step. They're not approving the plan, but they do need to act on it, either approve it or approve it with conditions, but they're only approving to move to the next step, if that makes sense.
I think in a couple, I'll consent in a couple places we say, if approved, it goes here, but we've made a recommendation for approval. We haven't approved, we don't actually approve anything.
And that still gives you still have the ability to make recommendations and place conditions on it.
Et cetera. Yeah.
Yep.
I understand.
So, okay.
But that is, I think, the gist of a lot of these changes, so we do want to get it as clear as we can, so help us out as we move along with it. As I was saying, the first big change in here was putting in the preliminary or pre-application meeting. We did have that for site plan review, but we've incorporated it into here for major subdivision, and also the language for it's earlier in the ordinance, so it also has to be determined at a minor subdivision, so it refers to having discussions with the city planner for a pre-application meeting. Chances are it's not going to go to that unless they say it's a major subdivision, but here it's just talking about it and it refers back to that section. And then it gets into the actual application process. So what it's doing is it's saying what the applicant needs to provide to meet to get the process started, the formal process started. One of the changes here is that it talks about the fees and other things, and that's all right, kind of similar to our ordinance. But a couple changes are that, one, we talked about this a little bit before, that we are going to, there's a online application form for a major subdivision. So it talks about that in here. And I'll point out later on where there's changes that a lot of the details about the types of things that appear on the plan itself are no longer embedded in the code, they're in the application, and when I get to that part, I'll talk to you a little bit more about it. It does talk in your copy below about preliminary evaluations, and in there, the current code just talked about any preliminary applications from the state planning code. That was really a reference to the plus review, if it's needed. But there were some comments from subcommittee members about, is there other agency reviews that we wanted to talk about? So in your copy, that's been expanded, so it has the plus review. It also talks about the conservation district for pre-application, DELDOT reviews, emergency services for addressing and subdivision names. The one thing that Janelle and I talked about is that a lot of these things are not available right when you're submitting the application, but that the timing was more appropriate when, Janelle, what did we talk about?
We talked about like 15 days before it goes to planning commission, because that way then I have time to make sure I have everything in order. I can make sure I have time before it has to be posted on the agenda, and then I have time to make sure I can put the staff report together. So to me, it made more sense, because sometimes you can't always, you can make the application, but you can't always get into those agencies. But we want to make sure we've gotten those comments before it gets to planning commission, but not at time of submission.
So in my notes with Janelle, and I was just reviewing them again, this entire section that's about preliminary evaluations would go under the staff report, which is later on. And you would get all of those plus Parks and Recreation, city engineer, city planner, everything would be in one staff report. Looking at the next page on the blurb, any questions on the first page?
Yes, question about, aren't there Sussex County fees involved too, besides the Conservation District? Sussex County needs application fees for
For
permits?
building permits,
For building permits.
but not for review of an application.
So the individual permits for housing at that time, but not for the general thing?
Correct. They have nothing to do with our plan review, but if you pull a building permit, you do have to get one for the city and one for the county.
Right.
But it's only for construction items, not for plan review.
Very good, okay, I just want to be sure of that.
Glenn, do you have to pay for when you record it at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there is that fee.
I mean, that's later, way later, but yeah.
So
That'll be on the applicant and.
It is on the applicant? Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna fix that, so the city no longer is responsible for recordation of the plan, which is what's in the code, and I'm like, I don't wanna touch that. So Tom is working on fixing that one too. That gets back into the final plan approval process.
Okay.
So another part of the application process that we elaborated on a little bit is that when the plan comes in, the city planner will be reviewing it to make sure it's complete. In the current ordinance, it says that it needs to come in with public notification, public notice verification. That's been the case for a while, Louis. It's a little bit complicated because we don't know when the meeting will be. So public notice could be going out to everybody saying there's a subdivision here, but it can't have when the meeting time is because that's not determined, and some other things. So we thought that, and other communities do it this way, part of the trigger for that would be that the city planner's reviewing all the plan contents, making sure everything's right. Within a certain time, it will go back, she will notify the applicant the plan's complete and it's moving forward, and should also have a date and time for the public hearing process that can be put into the public notice, as well as posting the sign and everything else. So one of the refinements is we still have that, but it's being triggered by not when they're applying for it, they're not giving us verification of public notice. They will be sending it out once they're told when the public hearing date's scheduled, and everything else is moving forward. So that's a change in the process. We think it's for the better because a lot of times it would be 2 notifications going out.
And what would the typical amount of time be between a notification and when the meeting would be occurring? I'm just thinking, quite frankly, for I think members of the public, I'm surprised how often I hear people commenting that they were surprised to, hear something was going on, and they either, believe they didn't get a notification, or they overlooked that notification, or they didn't, didn't live within the distance where they would get something in the mail and didn't notice the sign up until quite late.
Right, so the thought process is that the planner is reviewing the plan and making sure everything's there so that it can move forward in a timely manner. If it's not there, things may need to, that she'll notify them, and they may need to get more information, which would create more time. The idea is that doing the notice when it's verified that everything's moving forward, she could feel comfortable scheduling that time, and it should be in a, it depends on the time of the month and things like that, when they're notifying and when the hearings are. But there's been some discussion about setting hearing dates ahead of time so that if it were to, say, happen in October or August, that she's saying that your plan's complete, they've looked at it, meaning they've had the pre-application meeting and they're aware of any issues that may need additional information. So at that point, they're pretty clear on it can happen, and it should happen within a month and a half or so, with notice going out and things like that. So it should be a pretty timely thing.
Yeah, the intent is to me, it seems confusing to the public at this point, is that you get a notice, and sometimes the notice gets sent out before even the application comes in. So I don't know about it. I mean, because they've sent out the notice going, hey, we're making an application. So
I see, they're sending out the notice.
they send out the notice before the application even gets submitted. So I get phone calls, I'm like, I don't have it yet. And they're going, well, I want to see it. I'm like, I don't have it yet. So we were thinking, it comes in, I'm going to review the plan. I do a very thorough review, and then I send out a review letter back to them, and then if then I know, it's like, okay, then we can schedule a public hearing date, and then they know this is the 15 days they have to do the public notice. It's kind of like what I'm doing now with the Joint Site Development Ad Hoc Review Committee, is we get a meeting date scheduled, and then I let the applicant know, I'm like, okay, you've got to do your public notice, so then it gets done in the proper time. But it's closer to the public hearing date instead of, right now, it could be like 2 months, 3 months before, when the application comes in, before it gets to Planning Commission, and they just know that an application was submitted.
I guess I'm trying to think through whether we should be concerned about the amount of time that the public has between hearing that there's an application and when the actual public hearing would occur, simply because, especially in the winter months, we have many permanent residents who may be away for 4 weeks, 2 months, and would come back or would provide letters, et cetera, if they knew something was going in that they were concerned about. And so if we're taking away that really early notice that I understand is causing issues, perhaps we should be extending the time between the official notice and the public meeting, and because perhaps 15 days isn't enough.
That's actually, I think it's state code.
Is that a state code? Okay.
15 days is state code
Yeah.
Notification?
Okay.
notification. I think that's probably on the lower end of things, but
Yeah.
I think I'd be okay with 2 weeks. If you own property down here, hopefully you're staying active, getting your mail, seeing what's happening. These things happen all the time. I've heard of people getting their cars towed on vacation for streets being paved because they only need 72-hour notice. So I think 2 weeks hopefully will be enough. What are your thoughts on, well, if it's mandated by the state, then it doesn't matter.
I don't know if you've had mail forwarded over the last
Yeah.
year,
Yeah.
but 2 weeks is not sufficient to get that mail. It's part of the point.
Okay.
Previously it had been, but
Okay.
So again, the public notice requirement is a certified green return on receipt letter, a notice in the newspaper, and we physically post the property. So, and everything has to be done 15 days before the meeting date. So we give 3 different opportunities for the public to know that there's a meeting. And typically, I think it's in state code, is that for a public hearing, it's 15 days.
Right.
So we're in compliance with state code at that time. And that way, and like Tom said, it gives more notice to people, because, and again, applications come in, I do my best to get a website for that application onto the website, so there's stuff there. Some days I get a little behind, but I try to get everything posted as soon as I can, so a website gets created, so there's always stuff there. And I always tell people to to keep an eye out on the development activity page, just in case something pops up.
Now, was there any way on the development activity page to list what's happening in the schedule, rather than just posting the application, the plans, and all that stuff about what's coming up here? You know, let us know the schedule for people who are browsing.
I think,
You do that on the major subdivisions, there's usually, you guys usually
Yeah,
show a flow
usually-
chart, right?
yeah, I try to use the flow chart, and I think, and I've had some very initial discussions about trying to, like, you know, create like standard public hearing dates, because that way then people know.
Then you know when to look for, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so one, it helps me out, and then it's also, you know, it helps the public out, going like, oh, this is when the planning commission will hold their public hearing dates for this month. So they kind of know, and if we need it, we need it. If we don't, we know. That is still very high level. I'm just talking to the city manager about that, about just the idea. If you guys don't like it, that's fine. But then it helps people kind of get a better understanding, and it's more regular, so they know. Like, oh, planning commission has public hearings these days. They know ahead of time as to when those dates are.
Well, quite frankly, I think would be excellent for all of us who can
Great idea.
plan, you know,
think.
Yeah, you know,
activities and other things to,
You already know that those dates, I'm like, oh, I can't
Yeah.
do anything on that date
Exactly.
because
Yeah.
I know that's a potential public hearing.
Yeah.
I was hoping people would like it, but
Love it.
yeah, same here.
I love consistency and schedule and repetition.
Predictability.
Predictability in this case.
I know multiple places, and they schedule their dates out a year, you know, and again, if we need it, we need it, if we don't, we don't, but at least then you know, and maybe we just try for a couple of months, but talk to your other.
I think it's helpful to applicants too, because they know the time frame they need to plan for.
Yes,
So
because
you're
then when I
not
say,
caught kind of off guard, oh, you know,
yeah, and when I say I need things 15 days in advance, and it's like, we know we have a set
Yeah.
date at that point, and then everybody, it just, I think it just makes it more transparent and easier for you guys, staff, the public, to follow along in the process, so they know where they're going. But that's just my thoughts. You know, you can tell me if you don't like it, and I'm okay with that.
I know I think it's a great idea.
thumbs up over here.
What were you thinking, like once a quarter, like one public hearing, set date a quarter, or
I mean,
once every 2 months, or?
what you could do is just schedule one a month, and again, you just know that's the public hearing date, if we need it, if we need it, if we don't, we don't. And I think that way then you're covered.
Yeah.
And then everybody just knows, like, oh, that's a public hearing date, you know? And, you know, if you wanted to do it the same night as the planning commission, that's just my thoughts. Because, I mean, from a staff perspective, trying to get everybody scheduled for meetings,
Yeah, exactly.
it can be an interesting case.
And from our perspective, getting multiple emails, no, this person can't do it, so now we're working on these dates, and then,
Yes,
okay, and then we move on to the third set of dates. so.
Know that, like, I think for certain meetings for next week, I've gone through like
Yeah.
multiple rounds, so I think if we can just, if you like that idea, because I know like Glenn has a busy schedule, Charlie has a busy schedule, so if they can just know, it's like, oh, that date I need to hold, and you guys can hold, I think that, I think it helps you guys, and I think it helps the public just to go, okay, there's no more, they don't have to call me as often, like, Janelle, when's the public hearing date? Janelle, when's the public hearing date? You know, so,
Yeah, sounds good, yeah.
But as it stands now, in this report, they submit the plan to you. Once you've had the planner review it, then they're able to email the residents within 100 feet, 100 yards,
200 feet.
200 feet.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
yeah, because then when I do the review, I can let them know when the public hearing date is, and they'll have a better idea. It's like, oh, I want to get on that date.
Yeah.
So they can backdate, like, because they know, like, Charlie needs 30 days to review. So if Charlie needs 30 days to review and I need a couple weeks to review, they can figure out kind of like when they need to start submitting. So,
So still with the application part, under related approvals, it talks about things that if those are going on, the plan review would need to be impacted. So if a zoning change were required or parcel classifications, and the big one is annexations. That's not new, it's already in the code elsewhere, but it's just helpful if someone's going through this and trying to say, what's the things I need to be aware of? That's why we placed that in here. And then number 4 under here, I think it's on page 2 of your report, on the right-hand side, expiration of application. You don't need to, some of this is new. It's one of those things where we're trying to make everything consistent. So expiration happens with a number of things, with approvals, with application, and sometimes they were different. Like sometimes the applicant would need to notify the city planner 90 days beforehand, or 40, or 30. So we just changed it, made it consistent that they can notify the city planner within 30 days of all of the expirations. So Janelle doesn't have to remember which one it is. The applicants who are familiar with it, they just need to know a month ahead of time if I need an extension for my application. This is just for the application. So after a year by the code, if they've applied and things haven't moved forward on their end, they have to resubmit, right? So there's procedures in here to provide extensions. And they're all pretty much the same, that they can go to the city planner and request 2 extensions of 6 months each. And then if there's still holdups, which there are holdups with things, it happens, but at least the city planner there should be communication, right? And then if that doesn't work, there would be a 12-month extension at the end that they would go, the process that's used right now, they apply to the city planner and it would go to city council for review. So that's what the proposal is. And it would be across the board, not just for the application, also for mayor and city council approval of preliminary plan, and then mayor and city council approval of final plan. So all of the expirations would be a similar process, if that makes sense.
For both sides?
Yeah, I mean, they're coming to the city planner
Right.
for all of these. They have to request an expiration, and they have to they have to communicate, and it has to get approved, or else they have to go back and start over again.
So this would let them have 2 6-month extensions, possibilities,
Yes.
for good reason, and then another 12-month extension?
Yes.
Okay.
But that's the 12-month is when they go to city council, and that's the way the code's written right now for approval. Even if it were just one extension, they would need to go to city council for it.
But the first 2, who would authorize those extensions?
That would be city planner.
Yeah,
And then the 12-month would be authorized by mayor, city council, is that what you're saying?
That's what the proposal is, right?
Okay.
Is that language, I don't see that language in here yet.
I saw that language somewhere in here, I thought, and I somewhere have a note on that I thought it said if they had good reason.
Right. Let me read it because,
And my concern was really more a question for Glenn. I mean, the definition of good, is there a legal definition of good reason? I mean, I imagine that the applicant, if they're applying for an extension, would think they had good reason, but someone else might disagree. And
Yeah, the answer is there's not a good legal definition of good. I think it uses good cause shown. But it is kind of a catch-all phrase that's used frequently where you want to give the city council an out to say, oh man, like this, they really need this. And so you kind of use that phrase, good cause shown, but it can put a council in a bad position too, because.
that's my concern, opening up the litigation around it, yeah.
Right.
so things we have looked for on the staff level is, where are you with your review agencies? And they'll usually go like, I'm in my 2nd review with DELDOT, or I'm in my 3rd review with DELDOT, or, I just submitted my final plans to the Conservation District, I'm expecting, review, which means they're moving forward.
Right.
So we ask for, tell me where you are in your review process, because sometimes it can take some time to get through an agency review, and we like to make sure, we know where they are. Or sometimes they're stuck with me, or sometimes they're stuck with Charlie, and it just, it's like they're getting close, but they won't have it quite within the exact time frame. So we do ask for that information.
Charlie, you pointed out that what I was talking about is not in the copy that I sent out last week, which you're correct. Janelle and I talked about, she noted these are not consistent yet, and we talked about how to make them consistent. Let me read you what I have changed in it,
It's later on in here.
and I will send it. Yeah, it is. I mean,
I know, I saw that.
Expiration of council approval right at the very end, I see some
Yeah.
language related to it,
Yeah.
Similar.
But let me read you the one we're at, application. And actually, we just added a couple sentences into the middle of it. But I'll read it the way it is. Expiration of application. An application for a major, let me make it a little bit bigger, subdivision shall be valid for a period of 12 months from the date of appearance before City Council and shall become null and void if such application is not actively proceeding through the city's approval process through no fault of the city. For example, but not by limitation, the applicant has not supplied information, appeared at meetings when scheduled, or exhibited other lack of diligence in pursuing the application. So the part we're adding to this one is the city planner, upon request and for good cause, may grant a maximum of 2 extensions of 6 months each from this 12-month deadline. Each application for extension shall be filed with the city planner at least 30 calendar days prior to the expiration date of the preliminary plan approval. If after the original 12 months and 2 6-month extensions, such application is not actively proceeding, the applicant can request an additional 1-year extension by submitting a request 30 days before expiration for review and approval by City Council. And then it goes on with if the application terminates under the terms, which is already in yours. So, and Janelle brought this up, that we should try to make them more consistent. So this one included that's in there, and I'll send you the addendum out with all of our other comments on these expiration parts.
My question was more just whether our legal advice is that this is the appropriate wording,
I do know that, Janelle, you're probably familiar with it. In Sussex County, they have an expiration part, and they list several things of what connotates good cause. Is that something you think we should consider, to just be more explicit with it?
I mean, I think what's in the code now is, it works, and again, I mean, I'm usually asking, because usually they're stuck with an agency. And it's not, they're usually stuck with an agency, especially for like time extensions. But if we want to go like a little bit more explicit and go, okay, where are we with those agencies, provide detail, I think we could do that.
I thought the key thing was communicating so that someone on the city end knows what's going on and has a record of it,
Yeah.
which we don't, it's not that clear right now. They just come in, they'll send a letter and ask for it, and it goes right to City Council without some of these discussions. So I think that having someone, you now have a city planner who can network with them and get information and say, that's not good cause. I mean, it's an interpretation thing, but it's I think, a lot better than what we have right now.
I think the later one, and I guess we'll come to it, says that the city planner was making a decision on the extensions.
Yeah,
And previously, it had been city council. And, I just kind of wondered about that change, but,
Oh, it's actually both.
oh, is it? Okay.
Currently, it's both in the
Okay.
code. So what we're trying to do is clean that up. Because there's a section that says council approves it, and then there's a section that says the building official can grant a
Yeah.
6-month time extension. So we're trying to clean that up to make sure it follows one course.
And the way it's set up is it's actually both. The first 2 is the city planner, and then if it's still not going through, it goes to City Council.
And you could put an example for, by way of example, good cause shown is failure to receive approvals from agencies due to no fault of the applicant or something like
Yeah.
that, just to show that like an example is
Yeah.
this. It's not just, I wanted to go
Yeah.
vacation for a couple months and didn't do anything. So,
Okay. The next part,
Before you proceed, I missed a couple comments on earlier sections, sorry. I was
Okay. No,
looking
that's
at my paper copy now instead of my computer where I had the comments. One was up under G on, let me see where this one is.
Once the city planner verifies?
Yes, once the city planner verifies, and then, and here it's a series of notifications. And it just struck me that nowhere in there does it say that the planning commission is getting notified of the application and having access to it.
So I don't think that's in the code now.
it isn't, no.
So it's just, an application gets submitted, I do a review, and then it gets placed on a planning commission agenda. So typically, you don't see it ahead of time before an agenda, and you don't get noticed, because I think there could be some legal issues if you start looking at things outside of a meeting and outside of an agenda.
Okay, that's the rationale, okay.
So, and again, I think the intent is, application comes in. I do try to keep the chair advised as to when applications come in, so he knows, or in the future, she knows what's going on, and what applications are in process.
Okay. It just kind of struck me as odd that Parks and Recreation is being notified before we were being notified. That was just...
And that's because before it can get to you guys, they need to
To look
review
at it.
it for those code requirements.
Okay. And then the other thing is I see if I have the right copy of this. These are kind of minor typos. Post 3 under G, it refers to section 170-8 as the notice requirements, and I think it's 170-9.
I'll check that out.
Yeah.
It could be, and just definitely, we go through this with a fine-tooth comb when we're, because section numbers could change and all.
Yeah.
But it's good for us to highlight it
I
now
thought
and
if I
make
was
sure.
catching it, I'd catch it, so.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And we're looking at just creating an entire section regarding public notice requirements. So it's all in the same place and it's all the same process. Because right now, the process for a site plan, the process for a subdivision, process for, it's all over the place, and consistency, clarity for everybody. We're going to look at just creating one section for it.
And then under C, Planning Commission Preliminary Plan Review, under C 2, the public hearing, I didn't see anything in here that really referred to whether all of, let me just find my comment here, whether all of the materials were publicly available. So I feel that sometimes, and this isn't necessarily on planning commission meetings, but in other city meetings, I feel like the public comes to a meeting and they haven't had full access, or someone has changed something and they're putting something up on the board that's something new. And do we anywhere have requirements about the time frame in advance of the meeting, not the advance notification of the meeting, but the time frame in advance when all of the materials that would be discussed at the meeting would be available for public review?
So that's why I talked to Tom about getting stuff 15 days in advance. So when the agenda is posted, and then typically the agenda is posted on a Wednesday, and on that Friday, I try to put the packet together, which will have the staff report, all those agency comments, so all of that information, and if I can, I try to get the applicant's presentation for that packet, so you guys have it ahead of time. That doesn't mean somebody doesn't change something in between, but I'm trying to get that 15 days, that way things, one, I have a set time frame when things come in, so things don't come in Friday afternoon and I just posted the packet. So you guys have a good time frame to review the material, so we're looking at like something like that.
And, I'm concerned that the public also has that same time frame to review things, and that they're not coming to a meeting with like prepared comments, and then suddenly, what flashes up is the applicant has, done a revised landscaping plan, or a revised this plan, or a revised that plan.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to get everything, if you're gonna change something 15 days beforehand, so that way we have that based on either my review.
But does it say that in here is my
I don't
question?
think quite yet.
Yeah.
That's something Tom and I had discussed, and I don't think it's made it into this one yet. About the 15 days
Okay.
before the planning commission, because when we were talking about like, the letter from Conservation District, DELDOT, all those agencies, we talked earlier this week about making that change, that it's like, you gotta give me that 15 days beforehand, so that way then we can make that,
But the agenda doesn't go out until 7 days.
but the agenda goes out 7 days, so I have time to make sure that I have everything.
That's what I always wondered about, was like, you guys get stuff on Friday, but the meeting's the next Wednesday. Is that enough time?
No.
Yeah. But you can't put
I don't know about others. I feel like for me, sometimes it isn't, and sometimes the materials are, I basically have a magnifying glass I use now on this committee, because it's some of the things that are presented are in poor resolution, and it's hard to actually read them at times, so.
So, yeah, if I can try and get that packet put together on the Wednesday I post the agenda, that might, sometimes is a little tough for me, depending on what else is going on. But I definitely try to have it posted no later than like noon on Friday.
And this isn't a criticism of you, this is more, do we want to be clear with applicants of the time frame they need to have things in, and then the time frame that we're committing to have it available to the public, when there won't be constant shifts afterwards,
Yeah, 'cause when you guys get it, the public gets it. So the minute it's posted on the agenda, that's open to everybody. So everybody has the time frame to review it. And sometimes, if you're eyeing the website for that application, some of that information's up there well in advance. It's just not part of the packet.
Yeah.
So if you have, a subdivision that you're interested in, you just keep checking that webpage for new information, because I do try, I did take a couple of days off, so people were like, where is it? Because it wasn't up on within 24 hours of the same day. But I do try to get it up within 24 to 48 hours of it getting in, so I can get it onto the website. So you'll notice, some stuff is actually on the website before, and that's all stuff that's going to go in the packet. So there's a lot of stuff that's already available on the website.
And I guess, I'm just saying, I think as a member of the public or as a member of the planning commission, it would be nice to know there is a date that I would know I can go, and all of the materials would be there. And these are the materials that are going to be reviewed at a given meeting, and they're not going to change. That I don't have to keep checking.
But that's like a two-step process, right? You'd have to say in the code that applicants' materials must be
By
in
this
15
date,
days
and
ahead of
posted by that
the
date.
meeting, and they will be posted by this date, and anything else that comes in will not be distributed to the planning commission. So the applicant, then, if they have something 5 days out that they think is relevant and they want to use, we as city staff would have to say to them, you can either go forward with the meeting or you're next month.
Well, and I think that also becomes, because we accept public comment at any point. The minute we start taking public comment, so public comments will continue to come in 10 minutes before
Yeah,
the meeting.
Yeah.
So,
And I don't see this as applying to public comments, obviously, yeah.
right, but I think, again, I try to get everybody, if you don't like the 15 days, like a 10-day, so if they can start seeing comments, that's when that needs to come in. But yeah, the best I can get it, again, into a packet is that Wednesday through Friday before the meeting, because that's usually when I have the time frame to get all that.
You
put
you
together.
raise a good point about we accept public comment. As soon as stuff goes out, we start taking it because, it goes both ways. The applicant should have the ability to read the public comment and respond.
Okay,
So,
I see your point, yeah.
it's a,
So, but again, I think they can always provide additional information at the public hearing.
sure.
Because that is an opportunity to, they can update, but I mean, if we can get as much information to you guys as in advance, yeah, that's,
Maybe the public hearing is different than the rules for a regular meeting, right? I mean, a public hearing, maybe it's, okay, everybody have at it and submit right up to the public hearing, because you're going to be able to present stuff at the public hearing anyway. But for a regular meeting, where you're just like taking in the application, moving toward preliminary consent or preliminary plan approval, maybe the rules for that portion of the application review process should be different than a public hearing, so that everything is in by a certain date, and the members of the Planning Commission have time to adequately review it and be ready to go.
Yeah, I think that what this is referring to is things that will go into this application packet in the staff report. And there's other things that will come in, public comment, or staff might have something to add to it during the public hearing. But it's really to get as much of the information for the initial application all in place so that staff can review it. And sometimes
Is that what we're
things
talking
change.
about? I thought we were at different spots. If that's what we're talking about, then I agree with the way you have it set up.
Yeah.
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 I thought we were talking about different
I'm
parts of the
talking,
review process.
I'm thinking also, though, I'm more concerned about when we're actually voting on a plan
Right.
that we've had, what we're going to vote on locked in at a certain date, and not getting things on very short notice, revisions that,
so, and that goes, I think, a lot of times, and just for anybody who's listening, the report, the handout we're looking at is on the agenda. I apologize for not getting it up there earlier. Sometimes I just, again,
If you go to the website now, you can find this
On the
document
agenda.
on the agenda and click and view it.
yes, and you can open up and follow along. But typically, if you leave the record open for a certain date and a certain time, council will leave it open till a Friday at noon, and then I get all that put together, and then you guys have everything then to make a decision on. But during a public hearing, you're gonna get information that's coming at you during the public hearing, so unless you leave the record open, I don't think you
and I guess the challenge is, I'm trying to look at this from all sides. At the public hearing, there are changes that are made that are not super significant, and then there are changes that could be very significant. So if I'm a member of the public, and I've reviewed a plan, and I've looked at it and said, oh, I actually like this, looks really good, and then I find out that at the public hearing, they presented a revised plan, and, now this building is going to be, 5 feet from, I don't know, my property line, or where I bicycle, or hitting something that is very important to me, I would be concerned as a member of the public.
So to me,
But
that's
if
where,
they've revised, what trees they're planting,
Right.
that's
yeah,
not,
see, to me, there's the initial plan that's gonna come in, staff's gonna review it with, Charlie and other agencies, we're gonna send a review letter. They have the ability to make changes based on our comments. Typically, the majority of the comments that I'm gonna make, they need to be addressed before final. And if there's a significant comment, I'll tell them that has to get fixed before it even gets to Planning Commission. If something doesn't meet a code requirement, you've got lots that don't meet lot size, you have to get that fixed, which to me is, that's coming in that 15 days beforehand. So everybody's on the same page with that plan, so they're not showing up with a different plan that night.
yeah.
That's my philosophy and thinking
Yes.
of how that would work.
And I guess my only question was, is that philosophy sufficiently recognized here that's,
Not in this version, I think it's in some of the notes Tom and I were talking about earlier this week.
Okay.
So we will take care of that.
Yeah, I think it is, for the most part, and there's some subtle things that we did talk about for the application. But I think we're also talking about when you make a decision, which is usually post the public hearing, so the record's closed. They can't submit anything else unless they are resubmitting their plan. And then you typically are voting after the public hearing, so it shouldn't change. You shouldn't get any surprises when from the record closes to when you vote. And also the 15 days makes it prohibits them from bringing in a new plan during the public hearing that they didn't submit to the city within 2 weeks before that. So there's some safeguards in there. It's I think, different than what we have right now. But I think a lot of your points are good of we don't want any surprises. We want to have time to review it. And definitely, as a planning commission member, you want to have time to absorb the information before you're taking action on it or voting for a recommendation.
Yeah. Okay.
The next part that I wanted to, that's in your copy is the staff report. And this is another section that we talked about how it's used. The staff report, the way it's written in your copy is pretty much the way it's in the code. It adds some more agencies, but when it gets down to what Parks and Recreation does, the city planner and the city engineer, that's a lot from the code, and especially the city engineer talks about detailed things that they're providing. And Charlie and I, we need to keep talking about this, but it seems like it's almost too prescriptive. That depending on the, on the plan, a lot of these details, they apply or they don't apply, and there's other things. And our thought was, as staff, and this is something we talked about, is to not have the detail for the city engineer and the city planner and have it as the staff report, that they're coming up with the issues during the pre-application meeting and reporting it. They're putting it into the report, but it's not as prescriptive as you see here.
So my thought on this is you've started seeing a report regarding applications, and it kind of breaks down like the engines and landscaping and other things. And my intent is to add the SCD comments, the DelDOT comments, the engineering comments, all into that one report. So it's one big staff report. And I know I haven't had a chance to talk to you about that, but because I know we kind of duplicate work when we're doing a review, because and just trying to kind of go like, okay, these are the utility items that they're addressing, so they can kind of provide that information. So it's just kind of one big report instead of multiple reports. So we'd have that in that report for a major subdivision, it would say Parks and Rec Commission, and then give when they heard it, what their items were. The engineer reviewed it. This is what their comments were, and now we have the ability to we just scan other agency comments, and we can just attach it to all that one big packet. So it's one big staff report. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Instead of just calling it where's this report, and it's just one big, because we're all staff, so it's just one big staff report.
Yeah.
I think that would definitely streamline things and make things easier and easier for us to digest as well.
Yeah, I think the code in your current ordinance reflects the city that had a building official and a city engineer. And it was very detailed that the planning commission needs a lot of this information. And it was giving GMB or whoever your engineer was at the time, these are the things you need to cover. And now it's more complicated. There's more things and different things, and they're coming from different people. So I think that what we're trying to do is give you the best staff report by adding more agencies into it and then consolidating information. So the idea too with city staff is they're meeting ahead of time and hashing through a lot of these details and giving you a staff report, not that Parks is saying it or engineer or whoever, you're just getting the synopsis of it. And we thought that having all the details in the code would make it so, it actually says only Charlie could do that, or only the city planner or others. And I think that the goal is to get the information in a readable format for the planning commission. So it's not to do away with any of those details, but package it and provide you a better, more cohesive product.
And I think the staff report can, in the code, can recognize it includes comments from, the city planner, the city engineer, and other agencies as deemed necessary. Does that work for you, Charlie?
Yeah, that works fine. I mean, I'm just glad to get rid of the statement endorsement or comment on suitability of land for proposed purpose, because I always would put that at the top, and then I'd have all my comments, but then the developer would say, he's endorsing the suitability of land. That's not what that's for. Quoting Charlie.
So we're removing that.
One thing I do want to talk about is that once planning commission, I assume through this whole process, they're still going to be able to put together recommendations and conditions.
Yes.
And in my review, once those recommendations and conditions are established, because I've always been afraid that they're going to get lost, I include them in my engineer's report, every single one of them, and where the status of it is. I think you might be doing the same thing, but I just didn't want them to get lost somewhere. But I also feel like it makes my letters go from 3 to 12 pages.
And I think if you've noticed, some of the final plans, I make them put the conditions on the record
Yeah,
plan.
yeah.
So it's like those aren't getting lost. And I think that will help out. So the minute you guys make a recommendation, and then again, we're going straight to mayor and council, so then mayor and council will oh, I like that recommendation or condition, I want to change that. So then when we're reviewing the final plan and all the other agencies are reviewing the final plan, we now oh, those are conditions of approval, where are they, did they meet them? And then I've been trying to get them to put them on to the record plan, and that, so that way they don't get lost, because then they're conditions of approval, so they stay with it forever.
Yeah, and I mean, some of them are definitely engineering related, but some of them aren't, a lot of them aren't.
Yeah, and I think since we're updating the utility stuff, then there'll be fewer conditions about that.
Okay.
And it might be more conditions about, we want increased landscaping, or, approval of a waiver, or when we were talking about those guidelines, it's oh, a condition is you have to provide that guideline. So I think it'll start cleaning it up a little bit.
Okay. We'll work our way through it.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
definitely have conversations.
Okay.
I want to make sure you're comfortable.
So I'm shifting to C now, as part of the points I'm discussing. This is after the application's in, so it's jumping to the Planning Commission preliminary review. One of the things we talked about as staff and people who worked in planning as staff here, the Planning Commission, when a plan comes to the commission, it comes first at a public meeting and then a public hearing. And it's a little bit awkward at times, because at the public meeting, sometimes, a lot of times, you're really just, the purpose is to say, do we have a complete application to the planner? Is it ready to go for the public hearing process, or not?
And to schedule the public hearing.
And to schedule it. And other times it gets into where we're presenting and talking about the plan outside of the public hearing, and that sometimes can get tricky depending on the plan. So one of the suggestions as part of this is to not have the public meeting where we're just scheduling the public hearing, as Janelle alluded to earlier, is already have predefined dates for the public hearing. And then it's very clear to the public and to everybody who's involved that there will be time for presentations by the applicant and by the city of all the material, including the staff report. The public will have time for comment. It's a cleaner process, instead of, really the intent is to really just schedule the public meeting, so that's introducing 30 days usually in before the hearing starts. And it gets confusing sometimes that we're actually talking about the plan, substantive parts of it, before the public hearing. So that's a thought that staff have discussed as we've looked through it, but we're interested in that point of discussion with the subcommittee.
Is this a second or a different public hearing than one that would be scheduled for the application? This is additional?
So right now, the way it works is an application comes, it gets put on an agenda for the planning commission. Sometimes it gets discussed, the public shows up, wants to discuss it, but it's not the public hearing. It's to set the public hearing date.
Wait.
Yeah.
Back up a minute. Say that again.
So right now in code, it's the item, some subdivision gets put on an agenda,
A planning commission agenda.
planning commission agenda, and the intent is just to schedule the public hearing date. But sometimes the public shows up, wants to talk about it, the applicant will show up, and sometimes there's questions, but we're outside of the public hearing. So we were thinking, the first time it shows up on a planning commission agenda would be the public hearing date, because you've already had
Oh,
that scheduled.
gotcha.
So it's clear to the public that you're not gonna be discussing something on an agenda. They don't have to show up a second time because they don't get a chance to talk about it. And then you've already had that public hearing date set. So everybody kind of knows that they'll just, we're gonna use that public hearing date. It's just an idea, because I do know, and then to me, as from a legal perspective, and Glenn can tell me I'm wrong, I think it keeps it a little bit cleaner if you don't end up discussing an application before a public hearing, and that everything's kind of been submitted and everything's ready to go.
I love it from a legal perspective. I don't know it'll work in Lewis, to be honest with you.
That's why we're floating
To be
it,
honest,
let's see.
Why do you question whether it would work?
Because I think Lewis needs to have a little bit of a lengthier discussion process before you get to a solid public hearing. I love it from a legal perspective because public hearing is really when everything's supposed to get out there and people are supposed to be able to comment. One thing I've seen done in some jurisdictions is what's called concept review. So a developer can, before actually submitting a full application and they're thinking about something, they can schedule a concept review. They're not doing a bunch of engineering and spending a bunch of money. And concept review is you get on a planning commission agenda, you come in and you say, here's what I'm thinking about doing. I'd like to hear some comments back. And the plan isn't set yet, but there's some general renderings and some sketch of what the lot sizes would be and those sorts of things. And then they get feedback from the planning commission and perhaps from the public as well. And then you say, okay, go ahead and put your plan together and submit an actual application. And then it might work to head right into a public hearing. But I think there has to be, unfortunately, in some ways, but I think there needs to be one bite at it before.
Again,
Yeah.
we were just throwing it out there to
Yeah.
see where it's stuck, and if it
Right.
falls completely flat, we understand.
I guess, my concern too was, I think sometimes there's some early comments that can help people reshape their plan. And I worry if we, that sometimes folks are being kind of corralled into doing a lot more work before the public hearing. And then after the public hearing, they feel that they have to redo things or make changes, and they've, wasted money, time, et cetera. So I like this idea of a kind of conceptual review. I also think it helps engage the public more, because it seems to me we often have to have a second public hearing. And
If I were a planning commission member, I would like it, and I love Glenn's idea. We do that kind of stuff all the time, like just in our engineering design, doing preliminary stuff and talking it out. But I like this idea of just going straight to a public hearing, because if I were a planning commission member, you'd have all the public input before you really start to do your review. But it might be on the backside where you run into the 90 days or something, and you start running out of time for the plan to be revised properly from the public hearing stuff.
And I think we also have to start thinking about, you're making a recommendation at this point, you're no longer looking at it twice, you're gonna look at it once, and you're gonna make comments and recommendations, and you can place conditions on it, and then they go to mayor and council. So you can recommend some changes, But those recommendations then can get reviewed by mayor and council. You don't have to hold on to it to make sure they do it, because you've already said, I want this condition placed. And then it goes to mayor and council. Mayor and council's like, yep, you got to do that condition. And then they go back and start making those changes. That's just an idea. I know part of the reason is part of the thing we put in was the pre-application meeting. So they're meeting with Charlie and myself, who are going to try and like, okay, you know, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think the planning commission's going to like that. So try to tweak that away. So we're trying to do that, but we could, and I think it would be an option if they wanted to do a conceptual review by.
That's the way it's typically done, yes. It's at the option of the developer. They can choose to take advantage of concept review or not. I kind of do like the idea, as I sit here and think about it, though, that everything would be, that plan would be in place, everybody's public comments would be in, you'd have initial, you know, and then boom, public hearing. And so there's no question about, are we talking about this plan or that
Yeah,
plan,
exactly.
or what changed? And so I guess, I mean, I could argue for it as well.
Yeah, I think you can go either way. We just wanted to see what you guys think. And again, you're just making a recommendation to the whole commission. If they don't like it, then, you know, that doesn't then go move on to council. But it was just something to think about, because I know there's a lot of confusion, especially on the public. It's like, okay, where are we in the process, and what are we commenting about? When do we get a comment? And I think we just want to make sure it's clear for everybody, while providing as much, you know, opportunity for public comment as possible.
I think the other thing that I would agree with Janelle, there's confusion from a lot of the press, the public, members of the development community, even new planning commission members, of what is this, you know, right now we have a public meeting, then a public hearing. Others have conceptual review and a public hearing. I think it would be helpful, no matter what we do, is to have on the web a flow chart that says what is the process, and set the expectations there, that this meeting is for, if it were for right now, it would be just say, this is only for setting the hearing and making sure that the plan's complete. So planning commission's asking that. But a conceptual plan, and I've seen communities where they do have that, it's still somewhat confusing that the public thinks they're going to vote on this tonight, and we need to come out and force. And that's I mean, that's good. You want them engaged, but you also don't want them to come out and force thinking something's going to happen that doesn't happen. So I think it could be a pretty brief thing, whatever the subcommittee comes up with, of what's the process for a plan coming to the planning commission, and what's that meeting about, so that the expectations, everybody understands it. And if they don't, you know, that hopefully you could just say, we've tried to convey this. The press might put it out there of, here's what the process is, when they're first talking about it, so they understand it. But I think if no matter what we write in here, if it's all just narrative, it gets lost in the shuffle, and the expectations are whatever they choose them to be. So that would be my thought. I think conceptual plan reviews are good, as long as people understand it's not an engineered plan, and the planning commission's just, it's more of a give and take, which I think is always good, but they're not taking action on it then.
And for the public who's listening, even a preliminary plan is not a fully engineered plan. That's why it's here. That's why you guys can place conditions on it and make a recommendation. And even when council gets it, it's still not a fully engineered plan. It's making sure that if you're going to make any conditions or recommendations, that they get taken care of ahead of time, and then they can go do all of those conditions and recommendations and make sure it meets your requirements.
So do the subcommittee members have a way they want us to go with this? We've presented something, you've had good discussion on it, you've heard some options.
Or do you want time to think about it?
I'd like to ask a couple questions first, because, you know, for those of you who've been on the planning commission far longer than I have, if you think back to plans, it seems to me, I see things coming up on the agenda, and people say, oh, that's back on the agenda again. if we think of situations where it took multiple meetings, multiple stages, et cetera, to get to a recommendation from Planning Commission.
The general public seems to think if something doesn't pass, that's it forever, it's gone, you know,
Yeah.
that's not the way. There's a chance to get it reviewed and put on and comes back, and people are just amazed that they could try again, you know, it's just, that's how it happens.
Yeah. But I guess my question is, if, you know, when you think back to some of those situations, would having had a conceptual plan meeting perhaps eliminated one of those reworks? Or, I'm thinking of it both from the public's view and from the applicant's view.
I'm trying to think of an example. They're all so different,
Yeah.
and so many different things can happen. Like with one application, we saw a plan, and then by the next time we saw them, it was a different plan, and I think there was even a third plan. It was very confusing. And I kind of feel like some of these conceptual meetings that you're talking about can lead to that, because if someone comes in and like, oh, here's what we're thinking, and then we come with a plan, and they do a different plan, you know, this is a tough one.
No, it's just, say, for a recent development on New Road, I mean, there were so many variables with the entranceway. Delgado was reviewing the entranceway, so the plan kept shifting because the entrance drive kept shifting based on Delgado's review, and turnarounds and fire truck access and all this stuff, you know, and people have to realize this is the progress, this is what happens, you know, it's not set in stone. So there are variations.
And I think we also, from between a preliminary plan and a final plan, things will change. Because, you know, it's like they think from a preliminary plan that this is where the stormwater management's gonna go and what it's gonna look like, and this is where the road might go. But once they get into all those details and go through the full review, it's like, ooh, I need to move that stormwater management plan, or that road needs to change a little bit to meet other code requirements. So there has to be some expectations that what you see in a preliminary plan will not always be the exact final plan. Because you're not having done full engineering, that changes do occur. And that's kind of a normal process as you do your full engineering. Right, Charlie?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like, oh, I'm going to double the number of lots or all the lots are going to change. It's usually like, oh, we thought the sewer pump station was going to go here and it really needs to go over here. And we thought the drainage was going to work best here, but it needed to move here a little bit.
And that always made sense to me, that there's going to be changes from the preliminary submission to the final submission. I mean, that's just, I think that's the purpose of the preliminary review.
Getting input.
Yeah.
Janelle floated in a thought, too, that's worth considering, is that if you did consider a conceptual plan, making it optional could be beneficial.
Yeah.
And one thing, I mean, we could proceed ahead with this and leave it there of what we're going to do with it. We haven't talked to the development community yet of talking about what their thoughts are on some of these things. So from the subcommittee standpoint, it could be something where we floated an idea. We talked about the process the way it is and just go into public hearing, and then the conceptual plan and possibly it being an option.
Yeah.
So all those things are valid. We could proceed ahead looking at the process, return to this, and then make a decision on those options, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would think an optional conceptual review is a good idea for optional, because if that developer has an idea they want to float around and not waste a ton of time, our time and money, I mean, I'd imagine an optional conceptual review isn't going to be too detailed, more like in your ideas, Ira. Is that typically how you see those meetings going?
Yeah, to me, a conceptual plan is, I'm thinking about doing, I want to build this type of building over here. What do you think? Give me some feedback of what you're thinking if I'm going to do this commercial site plan, which again you guys don't see, or I'm thinking about doing a subdivision and it's going to go here. This is my ideas. What are you liking and what not liking? I just think we need to make it perfectly clear that that is not an opportunity for the public.
That's not a public hearing.
that it's not a public hearing, that it's just, somebody's bringing something to the planning commission just to get your guys' feel about it, and if there's, significant changes that should be made. Because I think because again, we want to encourage public comment, but I think at some point, it's like, if you're just bringing a conceptual plan, if you're going to take public comment, it's got to be clear, because there's a difference between a public meeting and a public hearing, and a public hearing is typically where you take your public comment. It's been noticed. So I just want, in my mind, I want to make sure I'm following the right process.
So you're saying the conceptual plan review would be a conceptual plan review with the LPC, not with a public meeting?
Well,
done in public.
Not in a public meeting.
It's like not a public hearing,
comment,
yeah.
Because my concern is, it's just a very concept plan.
Right.
Yeah.
That is not going to be showing
yeah.
as much detail as I think as the members of the public expect,
Yeah.
which I completely understand. So
Yeah.
I think you really need to think about whether you want that too, because we're already going to have a pre-application meeting, so I feel like staff is already doing
Yeah.
that conceptual.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was wondering about too, and the communities I know who use it, they do that before the city engineer review and city planner review. It's more of your zoning says this, we think we could do this. What's your thoughts on it? So you wouldn't have a staff report done, you would just have a concept plan or sketch plan to look at to get feedback from the planning commission on issues you might see with it or guidance that they would have. That's how I've seen it done. I don't know if you'd have a discussion on a pre-application meeting, but not, the reviews aren't done yet.
So still take it to LPC then?
I think it could be an option. If you guys
Concept.
like the idea of the concept plan, and I think if it's an option, that's something you could, if you like it, I say go for it.
Definitely optional. What about timing, though? You said prior to, would there be a timing constraint? Like if they meet with you guys for your preliminary planner meeting, would that then negate the conceptual review?
So what I think in my mind is they'd probably reach out to us, we'd do a pre-application meeting, and they can go, staff can go, hey, do you want to go to planning commission? You have this option to get their feedback.
Yeah.
And then without an application, it just comes in as, hey, conceptual plan, and it goes up on an agenda just for cursory review about the holistic design, because, again, we're talking concept plans. And I know we like to get detailed, and even in my staff reviews, can get really detailed, so it's like, just remembering this is a higher level and setting, I think that it's setting expectations, that a concept plan is a very high level. So,
Maybe
I
Tom
could
got
see it being of value also if you have a pre-application meeting and you may have been giving feedback and the applicant is questioning that feedback and how planning commission might view it, having that conceptual review might help reinforce some views. But my one worry with it is I wouldn't want applicants to think that after the conceptual review, if people said, oh, kind of conceptually I like this, that they don't walk away saying, well, you told me, you told me you liked this, okay?
Well, we basically have to tell them to, it's just, hedge your bets and tell them proceed, we need more detail,
Yeah.
yeah, it's still subject to all the code requirements.
Yeah.
And we still have,
So,
yeah, and
conceptually, there are reactions, but it's the detail that will.
The problem that you have is you've got public comment on a conceptual meeting plan. You're going to have the general plan book saying, oh, there's too many houses, it needs to be reduced by a third. And then when we go down the road and their suggestions are not, listened to, they'll be disappointed.
So my question is, do you want us to further develop this idea and then come back at a next meeting?
I kind of feel like
It's not,
I like the optional conceptual review. I like it. I also like the fact that if you're in a preliminary meeting, you could say, maybe you want to take advantage of this and encourage that for the developer to come to us. Like, I'm sure that I'm sure there's probably a cohort of developers, correct me if I'm wrong, that probably aren't going to do a conceptual plan because they've been doing this for a long time. They're going to come in with what they want, and I think this might not be used as much. I used to be used a lot in other, sorry, Glenn.
I'm cutting you off there, sorry about that. The criticism I see of it is some developers believe that the conceptual review is just a trickery by the planning commission to figure out what they want to do, and if it's something that's allowed under code but doesn't look good, then let's go change the code so it's no longer permitted, so when they try to file their application. I've heard that criticism of it. It's obviously not true,
I see.
but that's the criticism I've heard of it.
So I think do you guys want us to dive a little bit deeper into this idea or not?
I like the idea. It's optional. I see it as a tool for the developer and the city. Definitely no public comment on a conceptual plan.
But the developer can always turn it down.
It's
Or could we-
optional. I think
Right.
it gives you in your
Right.
preliminary assessment another kind of,
It's like, hey,
Use.
I'm telling you, this is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
They're thinking, and they're like, but you have this option to,
yeah.
Find out for yourself.
Well, Tom's idea was to put it in there for now, maybe highlight it for our committees further, so you get a chance to mull it over for a while and then decide whether we want to keep it in there or not. But you also mentioned the development community's input. I know I'm getting you sidetracked on your presentation, but what were we thinking there? Because I actually had an engineer come up to me and said, I heard you guys are meeting on this, and I'd like to have my chance to come in.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to, and that's what this other handout is where we are with the pieces, and we have a complete rough draft.
Yeah.
I think when we have a complete rough draft, we've worked out a lot of these ideas, and that would be the idea. I mean, we talked about this from the beginning, of getting feedback from constituents, and the development community is one of them. So I think when we have that rough draft, it'll be a good time to...
we have taken public comments before, and I know I've reached out to a number of engineers and developers, and to make them aware of this, and they were going to keep their eye on it.
Okay.
But, I think if you guys want to make, because again, it's an open meeting. One member of the public left. There might be a few more on Zoom. But we definitely can take comments. But if maybe you wanted to do like a workshop or something before it even goes to planning commission, we can definitely look at that to get everybody's perspective.
And I think one of the big things is we're already addressing by getting council involved in the preliminary review. It's one of the things I've been hearing.
Because I think from our perspective, we're making it clear and more transparent. Maybe that's not the case from the public's perspective. So, I think once we get a little bit farther in the draft, and then maybe that's something you want to do is we want to encourage a public workshop with this committee and get some public feedback.
Yeah, and I think we'd need to have, some PowerPoint materials that, because I think most of the public most of them do not understand the current process. So to review a revised process.
Yeah, we started off in the beginning. This is our current process.
Exactly.
Follow along as long as it goes, and then our cleaner process. Okay. Sorry, Tom?
So we're getting a lot of good comments. Let me ask the chair, we could go on with this handout we're about halfway through it now. And I'd like to talk about the overall schedule. How long do you want us to keep discussing with you? Just for our reference.
For today?
Uh-huh.
I've got till 3 o'clock. No.
I have a 12:30 meeting.
Did you want to move over to this for a little while? Maybe we could get in. I know we usually try to keep these about an hour and a half, right?
You do.
So we're coming up. We got about 5 minutes left.
If we need to go a little bit longer, that's okay.
Yeah, you guys want to go to 11:45? Is that okay with you guys? An extra 15, and we'll just try to get some more of this land territory covered.
I think it'd be
15,
helpful for
20? Yeah.
myself to get through preliminary plan, which we're almost through here.
Okay.
And then jump over to this schedule.
Okay.
And then if we need to come come back to final plan and all, we could set that at the next meeting. That's just my thought.
And then again, if you have comments in between, please let us know. So if you had any comments, because I know we gave homework last time about all the design guidelines and standards, so again,
Yeah, I had comments on those.
Perfect.
I can just send them
yeah, just send them to us and we can make sure.
on as comments in the
Perfect.
document, yeah.
We're still under C, Planning Commission preliminary plan review. This is something that we talked about after this went out, and let me just describe, under 3. This is the section that in our current code on the opposite page, that's 170-19E, Planning Commission review, and I'm looking at the left-hand column now. These are the considerations, the 22 considerations that the Planning Commission looked at when they reviewed a preliminary plan for preliminary consent. And for those who followed along the discussions and what we've talked about doing with these is to repackage them as we've already looked at the design standards and guidelines in a lot of them, and we've created an intent statement with each. And our suggestion was, from the beginning, and we're still looking at it, is to put, instead of these 22 considerations, the intent statements from Article 4 here for reference. And then the Planning Commission would use that as their preliminary review recommendation. So you're not trying to get them to comply with those design standards and guidelines, you're informing them about them. And you're looking at the plan based on a number of things, but also those intent statements. So what your copy has is talks about what the Planning Commission should look at when they're evaluating it under C3. And it talks about, the first thing is the plans in compliance to provisions of the chapter, and really the code and other things. So that's what your staff report's going to tell you. The applicant has participated in preliminary reviews required by state law, so that's the other related reviews. Not all reviews have to go through plus review, but if they do, we want to just inquire about that and make sure we have the paperwork for it. The public's been provided opportunity to review application material. That's something that we constantly talk about in these meetings. And then the proposed preliminary plan will be consistent with criteria to ensure safety, maximize compatibility with adopted policies. So that's, I think, some of the existing language. But then it gets into, on the next page, what I just talked about. It has the intent statements. At the top of the page, utilities, and then streets when that comes, electric, water, and sewer. If you look at it, it's pretty verbose, the intent statements, and there's a lot of similarities in them. What we thought in this section, instead of repeating them and duplicating them, and then possibly amending one and not the other, is instead of duplicating the intent statements, we would describe that the Planning Commission in its preliminary review would refer to the intent statements in Article 4 without repeating them here.
So in Article 4 would be your utilities that had the water, the sewer, the electric, and I'm just, for the public listening, they'd also have the streets, the site design, the runoff and drainage. So we just don't repeat it. It's just we're saying, hey, by the way, you have to comply with the intent of this section of code, and this, what's currently here, is in that section of code.
So
Does
we're
that
not
make sense?
changing that it wouldn't be applicable, we're just changing that
We're not repeating it.
repeating it. Yeah, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so
Okay.
would this be changing out the 22 considerations to the intent statement? So the 22 considerations would,
So the 22 considerations have been broken up into the sections, like the utility, the water, the sewer, the electric, the site design. And then right now, as it reads, is like D1, it says utilities. What D1 would say is the preliminary plan has to comply with the intent of Article 4. And I'm not sure if it is Article 4, but Article 4, and then Article 4 has utilities. And under that is the water utility, the sewer utility, and then the site design and the street layout. So all of these are actually in a separate article, because then we have the intent statement, the design standards, and under the guidelines. So what this would read would be, you have to comply with the intent of this section of code, which,
It's clearer than the 22 considerations.
Yes.
The intent's the Article 4, yeah.
yep, so what it would just say is like, hey, we have to comply with the intent. So these intent statements just move to that section where they already are. I don't think I'm explaining
So
this
they're not
well.
going to be in this section?
Correct, but they're going to be.
By reference, they'll
But
be there.
reference, they are. If that may, yeah.
So we're not really moving the 22 considerations to intent statements. I'm trying to grasp that jump.
Yeah. Where are the
little better.
22 considerations now? So where would they
Do they
be
go
in
away?
your proposal? I mean,
The idea for, like, one of them is to, let me pick one out. Screening of objectionable features from neighboring properties and roadways. I think what we talked about is that we can talk about that consideration clearer through design standards and guidelines. But then an intent would be in there about site design. And so this consideration is still embedded in the design standards, and it would be reflected in the intent statement. But we're actually putting much more information than these 22 considerations. So we're really being more specific about what does that mean. But it's in a design standard, and then really what you're looking at preliminary plan review is the design of it and meeting the intent and advising them. Final plan, they have to show that they're doing all that. So to answer, John, your question, these should all be in there. They're not by verbatim, but the concepts are in there.
Now, I'm remembering from one of our earlier meetings, this was that big piece that we were looking at changing and having it be a lot clearer in the flow of things. So it's all coming together now, Tom.
So we took all of those 22, some of them were code standards anyhow, so we just kind of reworked all of them into, like, the ones that had to do with utilities into a utility section. Those that had to do with site design on the site design. That's where you're going to find your lighting and your landscaping. So they're all in a section that has an intent, and then standards, and then guidelines.
and we don't have those to review right now, though, do we?
We got some of those last
We've got
meeting.
the intent,
We've seen
and we
those.
got two or three of them last time, right? We got,
Yeah,
You got
I think, let me look at it, it's on this sheet
okay,
here.
okay, yeah.
Are the intent statements Article 4?
Yes,
That's right,
I
okay.
think it says Article 6 here, but
Okay.
that's
Yeah,
incorrect.
the articles are going to be changing, so
Gotcha.
Article 4.
All right.
Article 4.
Yeah, so I
Okay.
think it's new Article 4.
I always felt like some of these, like, preservation of open space and scenic views, always got the LPC and a little bit of hot water because it was so vague and subjective. But are we talking about putting some design standards to that?
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, so like,
And the other subcommittee is working on design standards for open space for the AX stuff, but the belief is that those would be applicable, or would be considered by this committee
Okay.
for,
yeah, they'll probably overlap a lot.
Yeah.
So the cluster and then the open space will probably overlap, and then we'll have one consistent open space definition. So, again, I don't want anybody to start stressing about like a page and a half is gonna disappear. It's just moving.
Yeah.
It's just moving. That's all it's doing. It's all gonna be there. It's just gonna move, and we're gonna go, hey, you have to comply with these, go over here. So we're just gonna tell you where to go.
Okay, so that was my point there, that they'll still be there, but not
Yeah.
listed out on that section. The next section under C is for Planning Commission recommendation, and then as the blurb says in the middle column, this is the part that changes from Planning Commission action on preliminary consent to recommendation of preliminary plan review. So in the current code, from this point forward, it's saying the Planning Commission, after the public hearing, is going to vote to approve or deny or reject preliminary consent of the plan. Here, it's been revised to say the Planning Commission recommendation, and then goes through the steps about, after the hearing, how the Planning Commission creates its recommendations that then go to City Council, and they will then consider those at a hearing themselves, after they've gotten all the material, including the staff report and all the other material with the application. So the big part of this section is changing that part that we've talked about, I think, at all of our meetings up to this point. Any thoughts on that language or that change? That's the code language that would make it happen.
4B? A.
Just for the planning commission recommendation, because that's the really big change, is currently you guys see it twice, and now you're gonna see it once, and you're not making a decision about a preliminary consent, you're just now going to make a recommendation. To, like normally, like you do with a final now, this is that step, you're making a recommendation on the preliminary plan to council. Again, with all your conditions, and you can still recommend denial. That's not a problem. Recommend denial, and mayor and council can go, has the final decision about the preliminary plan.
I think it's very important to have our city council liaison be in this, because a lot of the city council people will be just catch a cold. We need our liaison to be with us through all these steps, and basically, he or she would be doing the presentation to fellow city council members to enlighten them as to what's happening with this particular development or something. You know, it's just educational, so.
Right, yeah, that's what liaisons.
Yeah,
it's all about.
just have to be there.
And then staff's there to help in any manner possible. Yeah. So yeah, I know we've had multiple council members attending virtually, and unfortunately, I believe our liaison couldn't make it today, and they do try. But yeah, again, they'll get their chance when.
There'll be more chances at this for them, yeah.
Oh yeah, this is just the subcommittee, and I think based on my feedback is maybe you want to have a workshop even before it goes back to planning commission, and then that recommendation and hearing, and then council. So hopefully that helps. Okay.
So the next section is new, because city council was not involved in preliminary plan review. The language itself is not that new. It's really them getting the report from the planning commission, and then they will vote after the hearing about the preliminary plan application under D2. And it says that they can approve the preliminary plan with conditions. So they're looking at the conditions that the planning commission suggested. They can use those, they can add to them, or not use some. So they're really taking another look at it. And then at the end of D, it's really, if it's approved, it is being recorded as an approval of a preliminary plan, which is really just in all that means is they can move on to final plan step preparation, and then all the notification that goes with that. And this is, again, if you remember our flow chart right from the beginning, this is reflective of that flow chart that council would be involved in preliminary plan review.
One thing that came up when the one other project got remanded back to LPC is that the developer thought that all they needed to address were the items that were in the remand. And I didn't know whether that was true, not true, or it seemed kind of confusing to me.
So I'm thinking we may want to put some criteria for a remand process into the code, to make it clear that there will be a new public hearing and what is being discussed as part of that, and I'm going to look to Glenn for ideas.
No, I agree with that. I would reference back to the original process to get to preliminary consent and say that basically the process, you can't say it's reinitiated because then you're going to have to trigger all the engineers' reports and all that, so you don't need that. But I do think we need to address what is a remand, what does it mean? And generally the codes say they can, remand it with direction to whatever, so, but we should have something that's, right now there's no direction as to what a remand is.
We can add something about like what the process is for the remand and what is supposed to be reviewed as part of the remand. And I think we can do that, because if it's coming back to the planning commission, I'm going to guess you guys are going to want to hold a public hearing, so we'll just make sure it's like, okay, the remand, it's a new public hearing, and what is the new public hearing on? Is it on the item as a whole, or the items that were sent back? And I think we can make that some clarification in the code. Though hopefully we never have to use it again. But
Okay.
I've seen some codes that only allow remand once, so that there's, the second time around, it's either a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and the developer's able to say,
and then this, yeah.
Do or die.
And I think that's part of the thing with this process is we're trying to get council involved much earlier in the process. So hopefully it'll address and alleviate some of those concerns as well anyhow. And again, I think the fact that you're just making a recommendation on a preliminary plan, is you can recommend denial to it. And then council then has that ability. So, there's a bunch of different things. So, okay, sorry, Tom.
So we've talked about preliminary plans, so next part's getting into final. The one thing I didn't go over, but it was in the packet that I emailed out, in preliminary plan, there's a whole lot in the code about what's on a plan, the contents of a plan. And there's a lot of details there. You need to have the detail, but whether or not to have it in the code is something that we've talked about. Other communities have it in their application form, which also has to be adopted with the code. The nice part about having it in an application form, you could change some of the specifications, and details and technology always changes, so the type of file and things like that. It's good to have it in your application form instead of in the code. So I sent out a copy of this, which is our online application form. And what I wanted to call your attention to is the checklist. So that's where the details that are in the left-hand side, like file types or scale or things like that, which are really important. If you look at the right-hand side, they're not there. Some are, most of them aren't. They're on this form. So it's something, again, to throw out to you that we are taking a lot of the plan content, meaning when we roll the plan out, does it have a sign block here for signatures and things like that? It's not in the code, a lot of those details, it's in this form. So I won't go into all that today. Maybe next time we start off with, does that make sense? Is there any concerns about it? Like I said in my email, I've seen communities do it either way. And Glenn, I don't know you've probably seen similar things too, whether or not the plan specifications need to be in the code or in an application form.
Right. I generally prefer it to be in the code. I've seen application forms that are lengthier than the code itself in subdivision reviews. So, something that's critical to the plan, I think, should be identified within the code as a requirement.
Okay. So we could go either way. I just wanted to put it out there that, how we deal with it. So it can go in the code, it can go in the application form. The only other thing I'd say, and we didn't jump to final plan, is that Janelle and I talked about this. The final plan is not a new application. It's really just coming back to the same plan. So whatever we deal with final plan would be using the same form. You only pay it once and you apply for it once.
Yeah.
So it's not, in the current code, it talks about another application. It's not, it's just submitting a final plan.
The only thing I noticed in going through this, and I had a couple comments on it, was the way it is right now with the headings, it just seemed a little easier to, at least for me to follow. And so when you remove all of those headings, it was a lot of detail without the kind of guidance of the different groupings, but
You mean the headings for this checkbox?
yes.
Okay, all right, we'll
Yeah.
take a look at that.
Yeah, because I like the idea of a checklist.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
even the applicants like the idea of a checklist. It sounds like we need to make sure some of it's in the code,
Yeah.
per Glenn's suggestion.
I think so.
Could it be an exhibit in the code, the
Yes.
checklist? Okay. We'll take a look at it. So can I take up just a few more minutes of your time as part of this presentation? I thought there's been a lot of questions about where we are with this big project and what's the status of it, what's done, what's not done. That's what this took an attempt at putting it in here. So this chart is showing the articles and sections that we've been working on out of the subdivision ordinance. It's got a lot of them, but some of them we're not working on them, so they're not listed. The middle column is talking about the description and changes, and the right-hand column is talking about the status. The colors are yellow. It's a lot of work's been done on it already. We just need to get feedback or fold it into the document. The red ones or orange ones are ones that there's still work to be done on it and more significant time to go into it. So the orange ones are definitions. So I've said all along, definitions are usually the last thing we look at because terms are come and go and things like that. And we want to make sure they're consistent with the zoning code and other codes too. So we'll take a look at that at some point. And then on the next page is the standards, the design guidelines. So it's showing which ones, a lot of them are done, meaning done in a draft form. So the ones that are done are site design, site suitability, lighting, landscaping, open space, the water and sewer, and electric utilities. So you've had drafts of them, and we haven't talked about revisions to them yet. But you can see the ones that are still out, that we still need to work on are streets. Charlie's still working on that one. Open space, Nancy mentioned that we're awaiting feedback from guidance from the annexation. And then stormwater management, we do have stormwater systems in the code, which are more of what's in the ground, but I think a big topic with Lewis is stormwater management. And we do have a draft of that part of it, but we want to give it to you all as one. So those are the big sections, but I wanted to just give you this overview so that you get a sense of what we've worked on, where we're at with it, and what still needs to be done.
And I'll only say that the water, sewer, electric, ones that I've submitted, I'm tweaking all the time, because every time I look at them or I talk to somebody, I find something else that I want to add or delete.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I don't want to have any discussion about it today, but I think my streets revision draft is going to be significantly different from the existing code in terms of the design requirements, just to get away from, for example, 32-foot wide streets. So just putting this little bug in your ear that when I submit that, it's going to look pretty different from the existing code. But that'll be for our discussion and consideration.
Yeah, now's the time.
That's what I thought. Yeah, it was like our one chance at it.
Absolutely.
So,
All right, thank you, Brian. Is that our ending point?
So do you guys want to schedule another meeting?
Yeah,
Yes.
let's do that.
So, and again, I know I got some comments from Joe the other day that I need to make a copy and get to Tom. But if you guys have any other comments about like the draft standards, please get them to us. And then we can, Tom can start taking a look, I can start taking a look, and we can kind of like start getting those into code and then get them back to you for discussion purposes.
Which specifically are you asking for feedback on now?
Everything.
Okay, good.
Is that what you're?
Okay, good, got it.
But I know we gave you guys the design standards last time. If you want to take, it looks like you had some notes on the stuff, so just send them to us.
Yeah.
And then we're happy to continue, because we want to keep moving this forward. Okay, so today is the 20th. Do you guys want to meet in 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
3 weeks?
3 weeks would be the 10th of September?
10th specifically doesn't work for me.
No, it's not good here either.
Yeah, like that week is like, lots of people are out, or going on vacation on the 9th. We can do you guys like Fridays? Is that, no, so I got a no from, on a Friday.
Traffic's harder on Friday.
Friday, yeah. Okay, we can do Thursdays, we can do Wednesdays. You guys pick a date. I need to get a couple other up.
16th?
Well, we have a meeting on LPC on Wednesday the 15th.
Yep.
I have a 2 PM meeting on the 15th, but aside from that, I'm good.
How about Monday the 13th?
Sounds good.
What time?
10 is good.
Okay, there looks like there's a meeting at 11. Oh, no, that's on a Tuesday, the 14th. Okay, so 10, everybody good on 10?
Monday the 13th.
Monday, September 13th, 10 a.m. Okay,
Oh,
City Hall and Zoom.
yes.
Okay,
Very good.
I will get that on an agenda and I will get that posted earlier.
And Tom, I just wanted to say, I thought this format was very useful.
Oh, good, yeah. It's not the easiest things to go through, so I'll try to make the font a little bit bigger too. And that's,
Yeah, I didn't need to use my magnifying glass.
Yay. All right, anything else?
I just wanted to say thank you to staff, big time,
Yeah.
for all your work up to this point. Nancy's going to be taking over from here. I think she's going to do a much better job than I have. And,
You're still welcome
you guys
to
have been
attend.
Awesome. So, I
And
mean, you
provide
got it.
feedback.
You got a good brain for this stuff,
And
Nancy.
you know we have your phone number.
You can still attend via Zoom.
yes.
And, provide comments, so.
But really, the city's very lucky to have this group working on this project, especially from what I've seen in some other cities. Wow. Is the Zoom ended?
Not yet.
We're not done? All right.
Somebody just say we're adjourned.
We are adjourned.
Whoa, you get to hit that gravel.
Charlie, I need 2 minutes off camera.
With me?
Yeah.
Okay.